So let me take a minute to introduce our two wonderful guests and presenters this evening. First is Amanda Ruiz, who is the Director of Operations at Communities for Restorative Justice. She is a first-generation Salvadorian American and a lifelong resident of Lynn, Massachusetts. Through her role, I'm reading this so I get it right. Through her role and lived experience, Amanda has witnessed firsthand how restorative practices have had a transformative impact to heal communities and empower individuals. And then we also have Joni Schulman with us. Joni is a longtime volunteer at C4RJ. She is a therapist and certified life and leadership coach with a focus on nonprofits and social justice organizations. She joined C4RJ 7 years ago as a volunteer case coordinator and circle keeper. You'll know more about what those words mean in about 10 minutes. Joni has also created peer-led restorative justice programs in secondary schools in New England and in New York, which I'm fascinated to hear more about at some point when Joni talks. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Amanda. There'll be about 20 minutes or so of slides with Amanda talking. Joni may pipe in, and then we will, in fact, close the slideshow and have Q&A. So take it away, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we launch into slides and probably a lot of new information, I would love to lead us in a very, very short grounding. I know a lot of us are probably coming from just being after work or just from after doing something. A lot of us are probably going to run and do something after, but if you would join me in grounding ourselves and coming into the space together, it will be very short. Usually they can go a little long, but if everybody could lower their gaze or close your eyes if you feel most comfortable, whatever you feel comfortable. And I'm going to lead us in a couple short breaths. Take a deep breath in and out. Think of a place that brings you peace or relaxation. Another breath in and out. And one last deep breath in and let it all out. You can return to the space. Thank you so much. This is something we often do to bring everybody focused and back into the space that we're talking about because we're always on the move. So thank you so much for joining me in a grounding. So again, my name is Amanda Ruiz. I'm from Communities for Restorative Justice. I'm here with Joni, who is a volunteer case coordinator here at Communities for Restorative Justice. And before we can launch into what our organization looks like, we need to acknowledge the Indigenous roots of restorative justice. Our ancestors had different forms of responding to harm. And according to Marshall Rosenberg, every continent had a restorative practice that served as a response to harm and sought to recognize the humanity and needs of the community members. Victor Jose Santana, an author in Colorizing Restorative Justice, wrote that acknowledging restorative justice roots is critical to work with integrity. And Howard Zehr, who many of you may know as the grandfather of the modern field of restorative justice and the author of the Little Book of Restorative Justice, acknowledges these deep roots and explains that while the modern field began in the 1970s, the restorative justice movement incorporates and learns from restorative justice elements from Indigenous practices. He uses the metaphor of a river that the immediate sources of the modern restorative justice stream are recent, both concept and practice, draw upon traditions as deep as human history and as wide as the world community. So what is restorative justice? So defining it as the Massachusetts general law, this is in statute currently. It is a voluntary process where offenders, victims, members of the community collectively identify to address harms, needs, and obligations resulting from an offense in order to understand the impact of that offense, provided, however, the offender shall accept responsibilities for their actions, and the process shall support the offender as the offender makes reparation to the victim or to the community in which the harm occurred. And there is a section specifically underscoring that it is a confidential process. So restorative justice, in a process, it is very different than somebody taking legal guilt versus somebody taking responsibility for their actions. So what are some of the goals of restorative justice? These are just a few. So some of them are putting the key decisions into the hands of those most affected by crime. Those are the responsible parties, the impacted parties, and community members, to make justice more healing and ideally more transformative for all those involved, and reduce the likelihood of future offenses. So that includes recidivism, but that's not the only metric or goal, but it's an important piece to harm reduction. So just a note on terminology. So you might have heard me say responsible party and impacted party and might not know what that means, but language gives, we give language power. It can lift up, it could divide and harm. And we at C4RJ choose to shift our language away from the traditional approach to those affected by a crime. So when you hear the term offender, we use responsible party because we don't want to define somebody by an action or a crime. And for victims, we tend to use impacted parties. However, we defer to what the impacted party or victim wants, and we see this approach as humanizing. So what is the difference between a restorative justice approach and the criminal legal system approach? So the traditional criminal legal approach is looking at these three questions, right? What law was broken? What charge are we going to charge somebody with? Who did it? Identify who did it. And what should we do to them, right? What is the punishment in the sentencing? Whereas at restorative justice, we look at who has been harmed, who is affected, what are the needs, and who is obliged to meet those needs. So a little bit more deeper into who we are. We are an independent nonprofit that partners with local law enforcement where they defer cases out to us. We're a court alternative organization. Some people in the world might use the word diversion. We don't use that word. We do see ourselves as an alternative to the criminal legal system and not diverted, still within the system. So we are the only statewide provider in Massachusetts, and we only work with cases once they have risen to the level of crime. So sometimes there's questions if we work with cases in schools, but we choose to defer those cases out to other organizations in the community that are doing restorative justice, transformative justice, to handle those situations if it is just school. But once it has risen to the level of crime and otherwise would move forward down the criminal legal system, that is where Communities for Restorative Justice steps in and would take the case out of the system so we can handle it through our circle process, which I will walk us through. So our organization began back in 2000. We are celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, which is very, very exciting. It began as a community and police partnership in Concord, Massachusetts many years ago. And since then really has grown by word of mouth by neighboring communities. And since the legislation, we have been able to partner with district attorney's office, which is really exciting. And I'll walk into at what points in the system we can get cases. We have 6 full-time staff, 2 part-time staff positions. We have a 12-member board of directors and over 150 community-based volunteers, which Joni is a part of that community. And we reserve a staff position called a program associate for formerly incarcerated individuals who have transformed their lives through restorative justice. So we're very honored to have those people on staff. In our referring partners, we have over 26 police departments that we are partnered with directly and 3 district attorneys' offices. So zooming out into this map, so we have 5 geographically based volunteer teams. So the darker colors are where we're partnered with the police department specifically. So you can see Concord, Northborough, Groton, Lexington, for example, right? We're able to get cases from that police department specifically. So that's even before they reach the court. We can get as a direct referral from the police department. And some of these lighter shades, like this light green and this light teal, we're able to get from this side. If you can see my mouse, I'm not sure, but the lighter green we can get because we're partnered from the Middlesex District Attorney's offices, Suffolk County right here, the purple and the orange we're able to get from Suffolk County, and this lighter teal we're able to get because our partnership with the Northwestern DA's office. And some of those roles that you may have heard at the beginning of the presentation, we have case coordinators. Those are the individuals who really manage our cases. These are all volunteers. And they're also the individuals who work in partnership with our impacted parties in whatever way they want to be involved in our process. And then we have our facilitators. In the restorative justice world, you may also hear the word facilitator as a circle keeper. At C4RJ, our facilitators are the individuals who are working one-on-one with a responsible party, holding them to that agreement that happens at opening circle, which I'll walk us through. What does that mean? And our volunteer teams meet monthly. And at their team meetings, they'll talk about updates that we share with our case coordinators. They'll talk about cases currently going on, and they take a break during the summer. Okay. And where does C4RJ fit? So we're able to get cases all the way from pre-complaint all the way to post-disposition. And depending on how we get the case is kind of this break of this line that you see here, right? If we're getting a case pre-arraignment or pre-complaint, it could be because due to the victim wishes, the referring partner assessment of the case, or due to objective criteria. And we may get it later in the system because the charges are serious enough to warrant an arraignment. The victim may not be ready for it at in earlier stages. They might be more open it to later, or maybe they did want the charges on that person's record, and the case may be flagged later in the system by a district attorney to flag it for restorative justice. And again, we're able to, since the legislation, we were able to get cases further down the system. We were able to get our first federal case last year, which was very exciting. So I will try to blast through our model because a lot of this is niche and very close, but I will walk us through it. So trying to think of our model in 2 bite sizes. So we have our process preparation. So we get a referral from either a district attorney's office or a police department, and we get the referral. We review the case, and then we go into our intensive intake phase. And there we meet with a responsible party, we meet with the impacted party. Sometimes they might have supporters. If it's a juvenile, their parents might be part of that process. And the point of our intakes is, we get a police report, but that's only one, that's one side of the story that we have from the police officer, but really the point of the intake is to hear, are they taking accountability, specifically for the responsible party? What happened from your perspective? What needs came up for you? What have things been for you since? And we'll talk through that, from the responsible party. We'll meet the impacted party. We'll meet with them to see what their involvement wants to be. We'll explain the different ways they can be involved if they don't want to be in circle, and we'll prepare everybody for opening circle. So our core process, I like the way our executive director explains it. She explains it as an Oreo cookie. And so thinking of it as 3 different pieces, right? The Oreo chocolate part, right, is the circles, and then the cream filling is those facilitator meetings. So opening circle, you'll have the impacted party, the responsible party, their support persons, the facilitators, our circle keepers. Sometimes those are the case coordinators, community members if they were part of the incident, and a police representative. And at that circle, they'll talk about what happened, right? Everybody will have an opportunity to talk about what happened from their perspective. They'll talk about what needs came up for them. And then once everybody has spoken, they'll move towards a restorative agreement. And those agreement items are really creative. Whenever someone asks me things can come up in a restorative agreement, I feel like my mind goes in a million different ways because I've seen so many different ones. But one of them is always weekly meetings with our facilitators. Some of them may include restitution. Some of them may include community service. Some of them may include a creative project around the incident, right? If it was somebody was drunk driving and hurt somebody. For a very light example, it might be, the consequences of drinking and and drinking safely, right? That might be one. And then once everybody has contributed to the restorative agreement, then everyone will sign it and agree. And then we'll move towards the facilitator meetings. And those are weekly meetings that the responsible party meets with 2 C4RJ facilitators. And there they'll do reflective exercises, decision-making exercises, and whatever else our facilitators come and want to discuss with the responsible party. Our volunteers come from a wide range of lived experiences, and we do appreciate that they're able to work so closely and privately with that person that they can really create whatever they want in holding them to that restorative agreement. So that takes about 3 to 4 months. And once that is complete, we'll move towards a closing circle. And that includes everybody who was at the opening circle, and there the responsible party can share what they have been working on the past couple months. And if everybody agrees that the agreement was, they have met the agreement, then we will close the circle. We will let our referring partner know in a very short memo this person has completed, our process. And depending on where it is in the system, if it is a direct police department referral, the case will close and that will not be on that person's record. And if it has a arraignment or, pre-arraignment, let's talk about arraignment. The district attorney will close the case. Unfortunately, because it has been arraigned at that point, it would be on that person's record. But we do everything that we can to get cases before pre-arraignment. But there, as I've explained, we can get the cases at any point in the system. So zooming out a little bit into that model that I talked about, this is really zoomed out. So the green, when you're seeing incident and case closed, that's where the system is holding the case, right? Our law enforcement partners, right? And then the blue that you see, case referral, client notification, case initiation, case termination or completion, that is held by staff. And then the orange that you see is held by our C4RJ volunteers. So when you're looking at this and people are asking, how much does this save, from our law enforcement being involved in part of this? It really is our C4RJ volunteers who are holding the most time out of this. I think last year we had about 10,000 hours of volunteer hours, which is absolutely amazing. We could not do this work without them. And we have really close relationships with our law enforcement partners, and it's great, but really, we really stick to us holding to our model and taking it out of the system, and we handle it with our own process. And right here, you might see an ARC commitment circle. And what that circle is that we have our own internal process if somebody is straying or if they're not meeting their agreement items, like if somebody is not making it to meetings, someone's not responsive. We have our own process where we give warnings to individuals. And if they meet a certain amount of warnings, then we come into an ARC circle to talk about, hey, what's going on? Do we need to amend the agreement? What do we need to do to get you back on track? Which we really don't end up doing. I don't remember over the past 10 years or so, I don't remember the data point. I don't know if you remember, Joni, but it's a very, very short number. I think it's under 10 cases that we've had to return that have been an ARC circle. I'm sorry, I don't remember the actual number, but it's very small. Okay. Great. So I'd love to show you all a dramatization of what an opening circle might look like. This video is actually 15 minutes long. We contemplated about showing it. Joni, did you have something before I continue?
No, I was just going to say I don't know the exact number of return cases, but I think you can count them on one hand.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Joni. This video is 15 minutes long. I can link it later in our discussion if anybody's interested in watching it. It really just goes over everything that I went to and everything I went through in 15 minutes. But this is what an opening circle could look like. This video walks you through from incident to case close. It's really a wonderful video that was done over 10 years ago. Oops, sorry. I will reshare my video, my screen in a second, but here we go.
Amanda, I'm not sure if audio was shared for the video.
Okay, let me try that again. Thank you. Share sound. Yeah, that's what I should have done. Let me know if it works again.
But they're not going to be using the process for something other than what it was designed for.
You can hear it? Okay.
The circle will include the person or people who've been affected. The people responsible will be there. The parents and loved ones are very important participants. The other people involved will be a keeper from our organization, a police officer from the referring department, and there will be at least one or two other volunteers who will be instrumental going forward between the opening circle and the closing circle in helping the person responsible fulfill the obligations made. We use a speaking piece, usually a river stone, and often we use one that has the word courage on it because we understand from this work that it takes a lot of courage for both sides in a criminal incident to step forward and use this process.
So Judy, tell us what happened when the police arrived.
When the police officer walked around with me, I started going through the drawers that had been disturbed. A lot was gone, but the things that mattered the most to me were the family things. My grandmother's wedding band and engagement ring. They were so beautiful.
And for you, how has it been for you since the break-in?
It's been a lot of work. For a while, I was talking daily to the police, and then there was the insurance company and all kinds of paperwork. It's just rotten. Beyond that, I feel violated. Thinking of someone being in my home, going through my belongings, my underwear, and I feel just sick when I think of him being in my kid's room and what he did and what he looked at in there.
The keeper of this circle will address some questions to the responsible party about what happened, what he or she was thinking, and anything else they would like to say at that point by way of presenting themselves. And then we usually turn to the person or people who've been affected and ask them questions about how has this been for you? And we create a space for them to ask the questions that they might have for the persons involved. We turn to the police officer and ask for some information from his or her perspective about what occurred, what the effects have been.
As Jake knows, breaking and entering, larceny, these are both felonies, okay? And you're here today and not in front of a judge because of Mrs. Parker and Megan. Whether you're applying for financial aid, you're trying to get a job, a criminal record is going to hold you up in that, okay? And that's the most important part of this, is to make sure that you understand the ramifications of that.
Thanks, Detective. Could you pass the stone to Jake's mom? So Alice, what has this been like for you? Judy, Megan, I just can't tell you how sorry I am. This is not how this boy was raised. I don't know what's been going through his mind. Every morning when I wake up, I just remember and I just feel so ashamed. Like I should have done something different. I should have known what was going on. I should have made him talk to me when I knew something was up.
We ask people to present any questions they might have, and also to make comments that they might have on what they've heard. Typically, a keeper would then ask, has everybody had their questions answered? And if people agree that they have, we then move on to what we call the agreement round.
So Megan, how about you? What do you want?
Well, I want what my mom wants, and I want to see Jake get it together. You should be in school, you should be going to classes. I don't buy it when you say you can't get control over your life. And in the meantime, if you've got a drug problem, deal with it.
We will, as part of the agreement, include what we call reflective exercises. And these are things that the facilitators will eventually work on with the responsible parties. And then another big thing that will usually be included in the agreement is a written letter of apology.
Jake, you and I will work together to explore what a full apology letter looks like. And it takes a lot of work to write an apology letter.
We want, and we will help guide an offender in writing what is a very meaningful apology. And that starts with the question, what did you hear the victims say? What did they say they needed?
I also want to know, Jake, that you're addressing the issues that got you into this mess and that allowed you to do such a horrible thing to people who cared for you.
So we bring all that together in this agreement round of the opening circle, and then we all sign it. And the agreement includes a pledge that everybody who's signing are going to do all they can to make sure that this agreement is fulfilled. Often because a community has...
I think I will stop it there and go back to our slides. So some questions about how to get involved at C4RJ. So here are just 2 ways that you could. You could become a C4RJ volunteer. Our upcoming new volunteer training will occur this fall. I can link our new volunteer form into the chat later tonight and just share with you the link. We'll probably start interviews late summer in preparation for the fall. And if anybody is interested in becoming a donor and becoming a monthly sustainer for us, or if anybody is interested in holding a fundraiser, I know Joni currently is looking to hold a fundraiser as well, where you can bring and invite friends and we'll host a fundraiser there. We'll talk about C4RJ. We'll be able to talk about stories there and whatever way we can share with each other. And then if anybody has questions, they can email me directly. I have my email here. I'll also put it in the chat for anybody. But before I close this out for some questions, Joni, do you have anything you'd like to add? You're muted, Joni.
Sorry. A lot of things were coming up as the slides were moving along. So I'm hoping some of that will be addressed in a Q&A. I'm happy to answer any of the questions about my role and, what brought me here and, about the experience that I've had that has become a huge part of my life right now.
Can I just jump in? And I know that I'm going to encourage people, if they have some questions, to, give a moment and think and throw them into the chat. But I think it would be helpful, Joni, for me, just expand a little bit on what you just started. I think it would be helpful for us to hear, since a lot of us are volunteer minded, and we're all part of this group. It's just, I think it would be interesting to hear from such a committed volunteer perspective. And thank you, Amanda. It was great. And there's a lot of information, and we can go back to a slide if needed. So not to worry, but if you could just do a little bit more, Joni, about what it has been like for you and how you came to it.
Sure. So, my history is I was a therapist working with adolescents for many years, and also as a school counselor in a middle to high school charter school. I did that for 12 years. And in that program, the disciplinary model used in that school was restorative practices. So, typically a school will use detention or suspension as punishment for a violation of a rule or, something. In this particular school, they used peer support. And the focus was, instead of on the particular violation, it was really the focus was on the relationships that were harmed. And so we would run circles. And the idea was not to separate and isolate the responsible person, but to bring them back into the community doing service and acknowledging the role that they played in the harm. So that was my introduction to restorative practices on the school level. When I left the charter school, I did do some consulting with schools outside of the Boston area and started some of these peer-led restorative programs. And then I slowly, morphed into doing leadership coaching. It was all kind of part of my training. But as I cut back on working, I had a grandchild, now 2 grandchildren. I'm working less and volunteering more. And I really looked for an organization that did this. And it is just by chance. I was at the time I was living out in Harvard, Mass, and Concord was where C4RJ was stationed. It was where the offices were. And I was trained and immediately became a case coordinator, I think because of my previous experience. Many of our volunteers start as facilitators, working one-on-one with the responsible party. I did a couple of those cases, and then I jumped right into case coordinating. So it's been a process. Now it's a very big part of my life. I would say that in my family, in my community, in most places in my life, restorative practice is a part of that. And I'm happy to dig deeper, but curious about other questions.
Just so no one is taken aback, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so that as we move into the Q&A portion of the evening,